I'm going to talk now about the various kinds of costs that business firms encounter as the cost of doing business and operating a business. And so these are all broken out for you in the textbook, but I thought I would sort of list them here so that we could talk more about them individually, and that way maybe add a little bit of context to some of these. First of all, there's total cost, which we've already defined as the total costs of doing business, and they really include fixed and variable costs. FC, fixed cost, VC, variable costs. The definition of a fixed cost is any cost which doesn't vary with level of output. They would include things like leases on buildings, salaries of officers. They're going to get paid, and all of these expenses are going to get paid whether the firm is producing 0 units of output or many units. And so those are fixed, independent of the level of output. But variable costs are not. They do vary with the level of output, and they will tend to go up and down as the firm produces output. So these are totals, and remember we had 3 kinds of values that we deal with typically in microeconomics: totals, averages, and marginals. And so the average value is simply the average cost per unit at some level of production, that is at some level of Q. And that is total costs, this value here divided by quantity, gives us an average cost. And this answers the question of what did it cost to produce this many units of output. If I produced 100 million pairs of shoes, what did it cost me per unit? Take my total costs divided by the number of units, and that gives me a unit cost. And that might be something important to know, particularly if one wants to gauge the distance between the actual price of the good charged to buyers versus what it cost the firm to make. And again, these are internal costs of production because inputs create costs, and inputs are strictly a business firm concept. There's also an average fixed cost, which is simply this. It is the total fixed cost divided by the quantity of units produced at any given time. And the fixed cost, again, at least in the very short run, are assumed to be fixed, that is not changing. And if the volume of quantity goes up, and this is fixed, then we would expect this value to fall over time. And as a result, average fixed cost is a downward sloping curve, and I'll come back to that in a second. Average variable cost is the variable cost portion of average cost, and that is taking a firm's total variable costs, that is those costs such as hourly wages, materials, variable overhead, divided by the quantity of units that are produced. And then the final one, if we have totals, averages, and now marginals, the marginal cost is, as we defined it in the last video, the change in total cost divided by the change in the quantity of output as the firm progresses from one incremental level to the next, from here to here, from here to here, etc. So knowing what marginal cost is important, particularly if we're talking about a wide range of our analysis of different amounts of output. One final thing that I should talk about before I go to the graph is average total cost. If average total cost, there's just another way to back into this is this. If average total cost is simply total cost over quantity, well, and what is total cost? We can replace the TC term in the numerator with fixed cost plus variable cost over quantity. And because both of these terms share a common factor, we can say fixed cost over quantity plus variable cost over quantity. And what is that really telling us? It's simply telling us that what is fixed cost over quantity? It's average fixed cost. What is variable cost over quantity? It's average variable cost. And so one of the ways to get to this answer is to do the most straightforward way, total cost over quantity, or simply this, average fixed cost plus average variable cost. So average total cost is also just another way of getting to this answer because it's really the same relationship. All we've done is simply exchanged definitional items in the numerator, factored these out, and so average total cost is also equivalent to average fixed cost plus average variable cost. And that's an important identity, particularly as you're looking at your work and maybe checking your work. Maybe it's a good way to discover that you've got the right answer, maybe by working it both ways. Okay? So as to the marginal cost, we know we've got this kind of a fishhook kind of thing that's marginal cost for reasons we talked about in the last video. One thing we should talk about is the idea that the marginal drives the average. And so a very important relationship in economics is whatever marginal changes happen as they go from here to here and here to here at every incremental level of production, it's going to affect the averages. The marginal drives the average. And so in the case of the green value, average variable cost, it's going to drag it down, but as marginal cost comes up and intersects, we see that the average variable cost curve is now 0. The reason it's 0 is because it was at one incremental level before it was still negatively sloped, one incremental level afterwards it's now positively sloped. It's being dragged upward along with marginal cost, although because marginal cost has a steeper slope, it's not quite dragging it up to match the same slope, but it is moving in the same direction. The marginal drives the average. And the same goes with the average total cost, which is being dragged downward along with marginal cost and then dragged upward. Obviously the marginal begins to change. And one of the reasons why the averages, average total cost and average variable cost, are slower to move is because, like all averages, they go all the way back to the first unit of output. So as a result, you get a bigger denominator of average total cost and average variable cost. It takes a longer time to move that. It's like trying to change your grade point average in the last semester of a college course, of a college program. It's difficult to do because you've got so many other grades ahead of you. And the same goes with the issues of average total cost and average variable cost. They don't move at the same speed as marginal cost, because marginal cost is just simply from here to here, from here to here, from here to here. And that's the only consideration with regard to marginal cost. One thing that I'll point out to you here is the distance between average total cost and average variable cost, and that is this difference right here. And that is the fact that there's a corridor between them that actually gets narrower as the output level is increased. And what is the difference then between average total cost and average variable cost? What is the distance must be the difference between average fixed cost and average variable cost. I'm sorry, average total cost and average variable cost must be average fixed cost. If we were to take that word in words, what's the difference between average total cost and average variable cost? It would be subtracting AVC from both sides, and by doing that we end up with average fixed cost. And average fixed cost just simply does this. It's not influenced by the marginal cost, because marginal cost has no bearing on it. Marginal cost really only works on the variable cost portion of the equation. Fixed costs are whatever they are, and the reason this goes down is, once again, is because this numerator is fixed and the quantity is going up, and so if the quantity goes up over time, then as it goes up, this entire quotient must fall, just due to how the math must work. And so this is the illustration of the basic model of cost as it faces the business firm. That's illustrated in your text. And I hope this is a worthwhile illustration of what the impact is of marginal cost on the averages, and why over time we see this reduction, in fact, to the point where this band separating these two begin to narrow. So I hope this was a worthwhile discussion of cost and a further demonstration of how we utilize both total costs, average costs, and marginal costs.